breakable terrain, a charming classic art style, and a great soundtrack. Add to that the promise of mining, crafting, and surviving in a roguelike environment? Okay, you've got my attention.
When I first discovered Minor Rogue, it piqued my interest after showing itself to be a unique spin on the survival genre. So we, of course, had to take a look.
We were definitely excited to dig into it and see what this demo had to offer. That is, until we actually started to dig in. To us, this demo feels more like an early access alpha build than something that's ready for public consumption. So today, we're going to break down what works, what doesn't, and whether Minor Rogue deserves your attention in its current state.
So let's start with the positives, because there genuinely are many aspects to like. Straight out of the gate, you immediately notice a very appealing and classic art style that really gives you feelings of nostalgia for many early 2000s games.
I was definitely reminded of that era of games. Graphically, I felt like it specifically pulled me back to a few RPG titles that I spent many hours in. So yeah, that's definitely a plus in my book.
As I listen to the soundtrack, it gives strong ambient and fantasy vibes, combined with a wonderful drumline that gives a grand feeling of adventure. In addition, the vocal tracks are a very good touch to give it that extra element of epicness.
It's definitely got that classic RPG style that you come to expect from this genre. It definitely fits the game very well. In fact, I feel like if you close your eyes and just listen, you could easily be playing any of your favorites.
In contrast to many other games in its genre, this game features a breakable terrain system that gives it a unique element which sets it apart. This gives the game a satisfying element as you mine through the terrain, collecting resources, and sculpting the world around you.
The spell mechanic is also unique, though not always in a good way. When spells aren't aimed properly, they roll along the ground like balls. This does create some interesting interactions with terrain and other spells, including bouncing off each other like marbles, but I wouldn't call that particularly useful in most situations.
To elaborate, there were situations where the spellcasting very much came in handy, especially when faced with certain enemies, but we'll come back to the spells again later. I gotta give credit where it's due. The bombs in this game are actually useful. In many games, the explosion radius is either too small or far too large to come in handy, versus this game, where it has a reasonable radius in addition to working side by side with the breakable terrain.
Honestly, I was pleasantly surprised the first time I saw the crater left by one of the bombs. As Jay said, the radius was reasonable, and the force of the blast worked exceptionally well to open up the terrain and expose hidden caverns underneath.
To be honest, I believe that my favorite part of the demo was the boss fight that ended it.
Oh, for sure.
With lots of fun mechanics and a very dynamic feel, it encourages you to stay in motion throughout the fight to maintain your survival. I genuinely had to put some thought into how to survive given the changing attacks, requiring a nice bit of strategizing to be able to defeat it.
Yeah, even from the perspective of only viewing the battle, it was quite entertaining, and I did feel like it was a proper ending to the demo. Now that we've covered the positives, let's talk about the issues. And there are quite a few. The most glaring problem is that this demo does not feel like a full playable demo at all. At best, I'd call it a playtest, and at worst, it's basically a tech demo. There's just so much to dissect here.
Starting off, we have the health system, which is confusing at best. The UI says one thing, the game does another. For example, mushrooms are supposed to restore 5 health, but actually give you 500, and that notification kept popping up twice for each one.
Speaking of the UI, the layout leaves much to be desired. Elements such as health and mana seem to be slapped on like afterthoughts. And also, they just disappear whenever the game felt like they weren't important to display. Conversely, certain tooltips would randomly remain on the screen, inexplicably requiring you to open the inventory again in hopes that they would be removed after closing it again.
In addition, it feels like the game wants to have a questing system, but truly didn't have much built into it. You're given a few quests before they suddenly disappear, leaving you wandering aimlessly, trying to figure out what to do to progress further. This serves as yet another example of crucial information no longer being displayed whenever the game feels it isn't important. Truly, the only information we got was the arrival of a threat on day 5.
And if all that sounds frustrating, hold on to your helms. As much as we didn't like the disappearance of crucial elements, at least they were given to us in some capacity. Other components weren't explained in the slightest. Eating meat gives satiety. What does this even do? Why does the spawnable enemy despawn at sunrise if not defeated? Why didn't the enemy spawn item even explain its function at all?
Speaking of things not being explained, the building in this game feels very ill-conceived. The built-in snapping when building your own structures felt janky and difficult to use. To add on to this, you can only build structures on the ground, acting as if pre-existing structures don't exist. Trees also generate clipping through said pre-existing structures, leaving impaired vision when you're inside them. This can also affect combat when encountering enemies inside.
Let's talk about more lack of quality of life features. Along with the trees having a negative effect on combat, the aiming system for spellcasting fully blocks your vision, making it almost impossible to hit your target accurately. Also, little things like a take all button when looting are simply not included, forcing you to move each item individually.
Quickly, bringing up the topic of destructible terrain, my one complaint about it is that it can leave small, floating bits as you mine through the caves, which can be aggravating to look at and traverse around. Regarding the built-in class system, at first glance, it appears unique and interesting, promising different abilities with each class. But as you progress through it, it becomes increasingly obvious that it didn't matter what you chose, because the skill tree can be maxed out regardless of your initial selection, granting those same abilities to everyone. So in the end, it's completely and utterly meaningless.
As are the biomes. Enemies and resources are the same regardless of where you are. Caves are boring to explore, structures are repetitive. There's currently nothing unique about the biomes other than their coloration, which aren't very unique either given the random generation of the world. Travel a few steps further, and you'll encounter another green or orange section pretty quickly, for example.
Last but not least, there's the time mechanic. The day-night cycle is ridiculously long, with nothing meaningful to do. You're basically just sitting and waiting around for day 5 to trigger the boss fight. And speaking of weird time issues, at the end of every single day following day 2, the game displays end of demo for some reason, even though you can keep playing as if it doesn't want you to get to the boss fight on day 5. Although you can spawn the same boss in on any given night using an item that you can randomly find.
So where does this leave us with Minor Rogue? The frustrating thing is that there's clearly potential here. The art style, the music, and some core concepts like breakable terrain are genuinely interesting. And the boss fight shows the developers can create engaging combat scenarios and mechanics.
But unfortunately, with all the potential this has, you can't help but ignore that it still feels like it's in an earlier stage of development than labeled as, with poor UI usage, lack of many quality of life features, incomplete explanations of core concepts, meaninglessness of biomes and classes, repetitive elements, and a not so wonderful day-night cycle.
So as it stands right now, this demo feels like it's at least 6 months away from being ready for public consumption. There are too many bugs, too many half-implemented features, and too much confusion about basic gameplay elements. For now, I'd recommend waiting until the game has had more development time. This is one of those cases where the demo might actually hurt the game's prospects more than help them, because it's simply not putting the game's best foot forward. Overall, we're going to score Minor Rogue a D. Now don't get me wrong here. As we said, what is good is pretty darn good. If the developers take the time to polish what they have, implement proper tooltips and tutorials, fix the building system to make it worthwhile, and address the numerous quality of life issues, Minor Rogue could truly be something special. But listen, if you're still curious, the demo is free, so there's no real risk in trying it out. But just be aware, your current demo experience doesn't necessarily reflect what the final game could potentially become.
If you enjoyed that review for Minor Rogue and like this style video, consider giving it a like and subscribe if you want to see more reviews like this. Let us know in the comments below if you've tried Minor Rogue and what your thoughts on it were. Until next time, bye everyone.